And a reminder here that all Khan Academy content is available for free at khanacademy.org. So here we are going to go through the words in context questions from the advanced portion of the Khan Academy's website. So we're going to make sure to read the whole thing, not rush ahead, because these don't take too long even when you go ahead and read the whole thing. So in the early 20th century, Constantine Brancusi's sculpture Bird in Space sparked considerable debate about the definition of art. And they also had a passage about this on the paper SAT. So tax authorities argued in court that the abstract sculpture, which featured a long, sleek form without any identifiable features, should not be classified as art. Brancusi ultimately won the case, but the legal battle highlighted the blank dividing line between art and manufactured object. So here I would say something like blurry. Blurry. It's not a rigid line. It's not a rigid line, not rigid. So rigid is the opposite of what we want. Unanimous, I don't think you can really have a unanimous dividing line. You can have a unanimous decision when everybody is on the same side, a unanimous verdict. Tenuous, we'll come right back to that. Straightforward, no, I wouldn't say the line is straightforward. It is going to be tenuous, and I often think of tenuous having to do with a grip or a grasp. A tenuous grasp of the subject means you don't have a very strong grasp, but I guess what they're saying here is, or how they mean it here, is that it's something like not strong, weak. I can't think of a great dictionary definition of tenuous that I would substitute here, but it's really the only thing that means something that is not firm. I guess not firm, not rigid. And so not the smoothest start, but we'll keep on moving and do better on number 2. So economist Marco Castillo and colleagues showed that nuisance costs, the time and effort that people must spend to make donations, these costs reduce charitable giving. Charities can mitigate or lessen or reduce this effect by compensating donors for nuisance costs. But those costs, though variable, are largely blank donation size. So charities that compensate donors will likely favor attracting a few large donors over many small donors. And I think this is an example of how these kinds of questions can really be a form of reading comprehension. It's not just vocabulary. There's a lot going on here. So nuisance costs. People have to spend a lot of, I want to give $100 to a charity, but I've either got to get my checkbook out and write that, and then I got to go get an envelope and put the address on it, then I've got to go get a stamp, and maybe I don't have stamps, so I got to go to the post office and buy stamps, and I got to put it in the mailbox, or I got to go online and create an account or look up okay, all of those things are nuisance costs, and they reduce charitable giving. So they're saying that charities can compensate donors for nuisance costs. They might say, here, I'll give you $5 for the fact that you mailed us this check. But those costs are largely, maybe I'm remembering the answer here, but they're independent of donation size, meaning that whether you write a check for $100 or $1,000, you still have to get the envelope, write the check, go to the post office, etc. So they're largely independent of donation size. So charities that compensate donors will likely, so they're more likely to say, here, I'll give you $5 for your trouble of writing us a check. They're more likely to do that for somebody who spends $1,000 or $10,000. They're not going to pay somebody $5 to write them a $5 check. So it's not about predictive. Subsumed is a good word to know. If something is subsumed in something else, it's sort of like absorbed in it. It's absorbed in it. It's taken up by, it becomes a part of it. You can look it up for more precise words, but it's not relevant here. Supplemental to would mean added on to, but independent of. And I try not to remember the answer. I've gone through a question before, but I really couldn't think of anything else there. But that's what's going on with number 2. Some foraging models predict that the distance that bees travel when foraging will decline as floral density increases. But biologists Shalene, Ja, and Claire Kremen showed that bees' behavior is inconsistent with this prediction if flowers in dense patches are blank. And that is because bees will forage beyond patches of low species richness to acquire multiple resource types. So another fairly dense little passage here. So, and they use the word dense, but bees' behavior is inconsistent with this prediction. Well, what's the prediction? That as floral density increases, distance traveled would decline. So something like that. As that increases, that decreases. But they're saying that bees' behavior is inconsistent with this prediction if the flowers in the dense patches are a certain way. They're going to say that bees will forage beyond patches of low species richness. Okay, so they'll forage beyond. That means that they will travel farther if they have patches of low species richness. So that means that the blank here is going to mean something like low in species richness, not diverse. If they are rich, if they have high species richness, that means they're diverse. They have this kind of flower, that kind of flower, this other kind of flower. So if they are not diverse, if they are homogeneous or homogeneous, depending on the region. It's not about being depleted. That could make sense, but it doesn't connect with what comes after it here. It's not saying anything about being depleted or depleted meaning used up, basically. Dispersed, spread out, that's kind of the opposite. It's not exactly the opposite of homogeneous, but it's getting in that direction. Dispersed, spread out. I guess dispersed is really more the opposite of dense here. Then immature, nothing about maturity. Okay. 4. Rejecting the premise that the literary magazine Ebony and Topaz should present a unified vision of Black American identity, this editor fostered or supported his contributors' diverse perspectives by promoting their authorial autonomy. So what on earth does that mean? Well, autonomy is like self-governing or self-regulation. That's a noun, and I'm giving adjectives. The state of being self-governing or self-regulating. Autonomy, self-regulating. Nobody else is telling you what to do, or you're not looking to someone else to tell you what to do, looking to someone else to tell you what to do. You're just taking it on your own. And then authorial, well, they're authors. So authorial autonomy would be kind of a kind of independence. He's basically saying, Foster is saying to his contributors, I'm going to let you do your own thing. And that way we're going to get a lot of diverse perspectives, and I'm not going to get in the way. And that's in line with this rejection of a unified vision. He's saying, well, we don't want a unified vision. We're not going to say it has to be this one way. We're going to go for something more diverse. Okay, so Johnson's self-effacement. So more vocabulary. What is self-effacement? Some synonyms for that could include humility, as if you're humble. You're self-effacing. It's almost like you're hiding your face, or not really, but you're not boastful. You're not overly confident. You're not arrogant. You're not bragging. You're not promoting yourself. Something like that. So his self-effacement, his fostering of contributors' diverse perspectives, differed from the editorial stances of these other editors, whose decisions for their publications were more the opposite of self-effacing, more, I don't know, something almost like dictatorial, meaning like they're dictating to their contributors what kind of things they should write or what kind of perspectives they should use. So looking to the answer choices, ambiguous, no. Ambiguous means it's not clear. We'll come back to dogmatic. proficient. If you're proficient, you're skilled, you are high in aptitude or yeah, something like that. You know what you're doing. Unpretentious. Well, if you're pretentious, it's more like you're trying to be something that you're not. You're trying to sound fancy when you're trying to sound high class. You're trying to sound erudite, to use another word that you can look up. Something like that. You're trying to sound like you really know what you're talking about and that you are a big shot. Unpretentious would be the opposite of that, but neither one of these has to do with pretentiousness. So it's going to be dogmatic. What does dogmatic mean? Well, it's related to the idea of dogma, like religious dogma. Religious dogma would be a set of beliefs that you are sort of expected to just sort of accept, to take as gospel, to take as true without really questioning them. And so if you're dogmatic, it's like you're preachy, not peachy, but preachy, narrow-minded. You expect people to do things your way. To use an expression, you have a my way or the highway sort of attitude. And that's something that would be the opposite of self-effacing. And so, I mean, in a particular way here. So, yeah, dogmatic. They want people to toe a certain line. They want to have a unified vision that is in line with their own vision. Number 5, in recommending this collection, I guess it's poetry, a librarian noted that the pieces by the spoken word poet don't lose their blank nature when printed. And then here comes the colon, and the colon always tells us this is going to be an explanation, an expansion on what came before. So the language has the same pleasant musical quality on the page as it does when performed by feet. So, okay, they don't lose their musical nature when printed, because printing puts something on the page, and spoken word is performance. So they don't lose their musical nature, their melodic nature. So it's not about being scholarly or not. It's not about being personal or not. And then jarring. Well, jarring is not the opposite of melodic. I wouldn't say that, but jarring, shocking, something that is, if I were to drop a book right now or cram, bang on the microphone, that would create a jarring sound. I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't do that to you. Even though one commenter said that my videos made him want to go to sleep, I'm still not going to do that. Okay. Number 6, investigating whether shared false visual memories, specific but inaccurate and widely held recollections of images such as product logos, that's not the Greek word logos, it's product logos, they are caused by people's previous blank, incorrect versions of the images. Researchers. What? Oh, wow. This is a complex sentence. Investigating whether shared false visual memories are caused by people's previous blank exposure. Wait, I saw that down there out of the corner of my eye. Previous blank, incorrect renditions of the images. These researchers found that, in fact, actually, such memories are often not explained by familiarity with erroneous versions of the images. Okay, wow. Complex, but this is going to be our clue here. They're saying basically that they were investigating whether it was the case that these false visual memories are caused by people's previous familiarity with erroneous versions, incorrect renditions. So that's our link. Incorrect, erroneous versions, renditions. Familiarity with, exposure to. Okay, so again, you couldn't see it on the page, but I could see it out of the corner of my eye, and I kind of knew it was going to be correct, and I inserted it there inadvertently while reading. Okay, so criteria are like guidelines, not quite rules, it's not relevant here. Forfeiture, that's related to forfeit. So if you forfeit something, you give it up. If you forfeit in a match or game, you say, I quit. Basically, you win. If you forfeit assets, you give up those assets. Compliance with, if you comply with something, you obey, you go along with it. But this is going to be correct. Exposure to. Biologist Jane Edgelow and colleagues have located what is believed to be the largest individual plant in the world in the Shark Bay area of Australia. The plant is a type of seagrass called, we'll call it, Posidonia australis. And it blanks approximately 200 square meters. And I'm going to come up with something really crude here because I can remember the answer. It takes up, it spans, it encompasses. That would be another word. It encompasses. In other words, its area, its size, the area that that's the Shark Bay area. The region that it takes up. It's large. It takes up or encompasses or spans 200 square kilometers. So, I don't think a plant can acknowledge anything. It doesn't really make sense to talk about a plant producing kilometers. Kilometers of what? And then advances, I don't know. Number 8. The following text is adopted from this novel. And this is, I should say, really more similar to the words in context questions on the paper SAT. When I say more similar, they do ask questions of this form on the digital SAT. They do. It's just that all of the words in context questions on the reading portion of the paper SAT have this form, and only a small minority of them on the digital SAT do. But what we're going to do here is really, we don't want to go from the underlined portion to these words. We want to read this, substitute a blank in for that word, think of a synonym, and then that should lead us to the right answer. So Mr. Brooke had traveled in his younger years. And they're just putting brackets there because the book probably said he. Okay, so Mr. Brooke had traveled in his younger years and was held in this part of the country, was considered in this part of the country to have contracted a too rambling habit of mind. Mr. Brooke's conclusions were as difficult to predict as the weather. Okay, so have something like, like you contract a disease. I contracted a cold. I don't know. I contracted something. Acquired. That's what we're thinking. Acquired. Acquired. So settled. No. And with all of these, they could probably be synonyms. I think contracted, like if you arrived at a contract with someone else, you settled a deal with them. Developed, come back to that. Restricted, so that's playing on a different pronunciation. Contracted. Well, contracted. I guess that's the same. Yeah, that's different from contracted. So like a boa constrictor constricts. It restricts your movement. It contracts around you. Contract, yeah. So those are all kind of related, having to do with confinement, but not the right meaning. Described. I don't know how described could mean contracted. I have to think about that. But developed, acquired. Basically at one point he didn't have it, and at a later point in time he did. Or maybe he had a little habit, but he developed a big habit. Developed, acquired. Like learning, development, acquisition. Those are words that often go together in psychology. Yep. Number 9, the text is from this novel, Alice Adams. Miss Adams had always been fond of vases, and every year her husband's Christmas present to her was a vase of one sort or another. Whatever the clerk showed him, blanked at about $12 or $14. So, okay, well, valued. You can value something in dollars. And so, not stained. But again, marked, stained. If something has a mark on it, it could have a stain on it. Marked and staged. I can't quite see the connection there, but that's not going to be correct. Marked and watched. Again, I'm not quite sure how those would connect, but priced. That's pretty straightforward. I'm not sure that one necessarily belongs in the advanced category, but who am I to say? Number 10, the following text is adapted from this story. John wants to travel far beyond the village where he lives with his mother, Maddie. His mother, Maddie. John had on several occasions attempted to blank the notion, but found it a difficult task. Maddie always took refuge in self-pity and tears, so kind of like he went to his room and cried. Her son's desires. That's the mother. She always took refuge in self-pity and tears. Her son's desires were incomprehensible to her. So if they were incomprehensible to her, she couldn't understand them. That would mean that even though he tried on several attempts to explain to his mother the notion, but familiarize his mother, something to do with explain, get her to accept. Yep. So you notice here, I wasn't thinking, well, what would we see in the dictionary if we looked up reconcile? Because you're going to see a lot of different meanings, and that's going to be true whenever you get questions of this form. They underline something. It's probably because, again, that's a word with many, many meanings, or it's because they're using a word in an unfamiliar fashion. So here we really want to emphasize the C in words in context. It's the context. So read, think, form an approximate answer, and find that among the answer choices. Don't just gloss over it, go to the answer choices, and then confuse yourself, because that's not going to be good. So it's not about apologizing, matching, or reunite with. And that is going to do it for this batch, actually. So 10 questions. If you have any further questions, add them in the comments below.